thank you for allowing me to share this memorial site and service with you. You know, that morning was a busy day in the U.S. Capitol. It's always a busy day in the Capitol when the Congress is in and things were happening, but it happened to be a day that we had the Prime Minister of Australia, John Howard, to come to give a joint session of Congress. And we had morning session as usual and started early that day so that we could clear out the mundane business of Congress before we closed down the House floor and swept it so that the speech from John Howard could be proceeded at 11 o'clock that morning. I was in my office early. I had a meeting that Monday afternoon with the President of the United States. I knew he was going to be out of town the next day or several days, so we had to get that meeting out of the way. But I was in my office about 7:30 in the morning, and I had several appointments, and all of a sudden there was a knock on my door, and somebody stepped in and said, "Mr. Speaker, something happened in New York. Either a small plane or a helicopter went into one of the World Trade Towers, and there's a pretty bad fire." And I said, "I'll be upstairs in a second." And as I walked into my office and looked at the TV set, just in time to see the second plane go into World Trade Tower. And I know this was not an accident. This is something we don't know who's perpetrating this, but certainly an act of terror on the United States of America. So the next thing I do, I'm thinking we have a joint session of Congress. A joint session of Congress is when you have the House and the Senate all in the same room. You have the Supreme Court, you have the President's Cabinet, you have the Joint Chiefs of Staff, you have a good part of the Ambassador's Corps. Virtually you have the whole government of the United States in one room. And I'm thinking this is not a very good idea. And so I tried to get a hold. I knew the President was out of the country. I knew he was in a classroom in Pennsylvania, in Florida, and was whisked out of there. I'm trying to get a hold of Vice President Cheney, who at that moment was in the floor or the basement of the White House with the Secretary of Transportation, Norm Mineta, trying to get all the planes, virtually every plane, every commercial plane, every private plane, out of the air and on the ground at one time, which is a monumental task. And not just in this country, but planes coming from Europe, planes coming from Asia, planes coming from South America, to get them grounded. And I'm trying to get a hold of the Vice President because I didn't want to snub the government of Australia by canceling the speech of their Prime Minister, and want to make sure that there's coordination between the White House and the Congress. But ironically, I couldn't get a hold of Vice President Cheney. I have a secure phone on my left-hand side of my desk in my office. I had a red phone that I got most of my calls on the right-hand side of my desk. But the secure phone, you had to punch some numbers and turn a key, and Vice President had to do the same thing, and we just weren't making connections. And all of a sudden, the light lit up on my red phone, and I thought, well, they're putting the Vice President through on this other phone. And I pick it up, and I said, "Good morning," and the voice on the other side says, "What's going on up there? The taxes are too high, and I don't like what you're doing in immigration," and on and on and on. And I said, "Who is this?" He said, "Never mind who this is. Who in the heck is this?" I said, I think you have the wrong number," and I hung up. And as I looked up, my desk faces out the front window of the U.S. Capitol. And if you know, the west front has the portico. All across that portico was the front of my office. And I'm looking down the mall of the Capitol as I'm hanging the phone. I see this black smoke just curling across the mall. And I know, that's not supposed to be there. We don't make a lot of smoke in Washington. Sometimes smoke and mirrors, but not a lot of smoke. And so I call up my gentleman who runs my office. I said, "Sam, the smoke's not supposed to be there. Find out what happened." And he came back a minute later and said, "There's a plane that went into the Pentagon." And I'm thinking, this is war. We're a sitting duck on this hill. There's 5,000 people that work in this Capitol. There's 500 members, roughly, of Congress, both the House and the Senate. We have interns, we have pages, we have visitors. We are a target. And so I couldn't get a hold of anybody in the Senate. They weren't quite there that time of the morning. So I unilateral decided to close down Congress, and I make a phone call to the gentleman who's presiding, Speaker Pro Tem, happened to be a fellow by the name of Porter Goss, represented Southwest Florida, later became the head of the CIA. And I picked up the phone. I said, "Porter, we're going to bring the gavel down, and I want to bring the chaplain in to say a prayer." I thought that was the appropriate thing. And so I'm waiting for the chaplain. I walk across Statuary Hall, and we're walking into into the chamber of the House, and I'm following the chaplain. And as I walk in, two of my security fellows, and they're pretty good guys, pretty big guys. I was not small myself. And one, played linebacker for the University of Maryland, so they were ample. And grabbed me, and virtually my feet were off the ground and moved me out of the chamber. I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Well, they think there's a fourth plane, and it's on the mall, or it's heading down the mall." Well, it happened to be a CIA plane that was unmarked that nobody really knew about, but it was scaring everybody. And so we were whisked out. Everybody was moved out of the Capitol. I was whisked out. I was in the back of a black SUV and heading towards the backside of Washington out to Andrews Air Force Base. And at Andrews Air Force Base, I finally, got a hold of Vice President Cheney. He told me that almost every plane in the United States, in United States air territory, was down, landed, and all over the northern Atlantic, over the North Pacific, down and through the Caribbean, so planes, international flights as well. But he said there's 3 planes still coming across from Europe that don't have the transponders on, and there's a plane, a KAL flight coming across from Korea across Canada that didn't have the transponders on, and they're trying to get those planes down because they certainly don't want to shoot them down. And I thought, wow. And he said, "You're going to go into an undisclosed location." And I said, "Okay." So the next thing I know, I was in a helicopter flying across the south part of Washington, looking down, nothing moving on the streets, everything just dead still. And then I crossed Reagan International Airport, and I'm looking down out of that helicopter, and planes are just piled up on the tarmac, and not enough gates for all the planes, and you can see that nothing moving, just dead. And I look out of the other side of the helicopter, and there's the Pentagon, and this blue-black smoke, and it's a beautiful, crisp September morning, but this blue-black smoke is just belching up out of the Pentagon with these dark orange flames pushing it up from underneath. And I'm thinking to myself, I taught history. I was a school teacher, taught history for 16 years, and taught about the British invading the United States capital just 200 years ago in 1814. And that, our country was at war. And I'm thinking, this is the same thing has happened. We are at war. We don't know with who or what for or how. But this country, our freedom is in jeopardy. Now I'm thinking, how will this day change the history of this country? Well, we proceeded on to an undisclosed location, and ultimately that day, the president of the Senate showed up, and the Republican leader in the Senate appeared, and my counterpart on the Democrat side, Dick Cavart from the House of Representatives, was there, along with Dick Armey and Tom DeLay, which made up the leadership of both the House and the Senate. But we were there, and still not knowing how this perpetrated, who was behind it. But we watched like everybody else, and we watched the CNN or whatever TV program was on, watched the trade towers come down, watched the fire going on by the time the cameras here on this hallowed field. And got a call from the vice president, said, "You're going back to the Capitol. We're going to fly you in. The president's coming in at 6 o'clock. We're going to fly you in back to the Capitol at 6:30. And we're going to land on the north lawn of the U.S. Capitol on the Senate side." And I was told that both Senator Daschle, who was the president of the Senate, and myself were going to have 15 or 20 seconds to the sticks to the press. And so I was thinking, what do you say to the American people in a situation like this? And so we walked around from the north end of the Capitol around to the steps on the Senate side and the east side of the Capitol. And as we walked around, there was about 250 members of Congress, House members, Senate members, Democrats, Republicans, all standing on these stairs. And Daschle and I walked up, and Daschle talked to the press for about 15 or 20 seconds. I did my time in front of the cameras and basically said, Congress will come back to work. We'll be back at work tomorrow. We have a lot of work to do. We need to bring this country together again. We need to get things fixed. We need a lot of people that we need to help and to take care of. And as I turned around and walked back to the assemblage of members of Congress, somebody broke out into God Bless America, and a cappella, it happened. And I remember chills going down my spine and thinking, this country will be okay. We'll stand shoulder to shoulder and we'll get through this. And I will always remember Every time that we went through the next 9 months, there were a lot of things that Congress had to do. We had to create a special kind of insurance to get airplanes to fly again, anti-terrorism insurance. We had to create an insurance so we could build buildings and repair the damage in New York and also in the Pentagon. And all those things were new. We created the act, the Patriot Act, so that we could find out who those people were that were ingrained in our country, that we could find them and stop any new type of occurrence. We had over 3,000 families that we had to make sure that there was support for, and we set aside $21 billion to take care of all those issues that we had to, and we had to make sure that there was a special court system so people wouldn't have to go and sue the airlines or stand in line and wait to get their remuneration or the support for their families. All that was happening in the next 9 months of Congress, and it was an amazing time of bipartisanship and people working together. Every night, I remember in my office, we had the leadership in both the House and the Senate working out this legislation so we could move forward. But you know, for the next 6 years that I was Speaker, I would walk into my office and stand at my desk and look down that mall. And I would think of that day when I stood and watched that smoke curl across the mall of the Capitol of the United States. And I think of all the heroes that we have in this country, certainly the heroes that wear the uniforms of our service, the Marines and the Army and the Air Force and the Navy and the Coast Guard, and certainly those people who wore the uniforms of the firemen who went up the stairways of the World Trade Towers, and the police who lost their lives, and the emergency service workers that were there to help and take care of people. Great heroes. But I always think of the heroes that we don't know about, that don't wear uniforms, that happen to be sitting down a row, 2 or 3 seats from us on an airplane, or the people who are across the room. But when something happens, when the call comes, those people stand up and do what they have to do. And, you know, we don't know if there were 4 or 7 or 5 or 8 people who took along with the crew and the passengers of Flight 93 with a couple pots of scalding water from the coffee maker and the utensils that they had left from breakfast serving, took down the 4 terrorists of that plane. They knew that that plane had turned around. They knew that it was headed for Washington, D.C. They knew that would happen in the World Trade Tower because they had the earphones. They were talking back to their families and their offices. They knew what happened in the Pentagon. And they, with their courage and their strength, took down that plane. Today we know because of the Moussaoui hearings that that plane was probably headed for the Capitol of the United States. And ironically, at the time that I was sitting there pondering whether we should, you know, close down Congress or evacuate or bring in the chaplain or say a prayer, if it wasn't for those heroes on that plane who are consecrated here in this hillside, probably the Capitol of the United States would have been the target and destroyed by that terrorist act. It's always in my heart. I'll never forget that moment, forget that day. I brought with me the flag that I had brought down off the dome of the Capitol. It's not a small flag. It's 7 feet by 14 feet. So it's the flag that flies proudly on top of the Capitol of the United States. And it's still, if you opened it up and looked at it, it would have still the black smudges of the smoke and grime that was in the air that day. But that flag is here, presented to this memorial, so people can think of what the sacrifice, because today that flag would have not been in existence. That morning, that flag would have been destroyed by that terrorist act, but not for great heroes. People we will hold dearly in our hearts forever and ever, along and consecrated with the great other heroes of this country. Thank you, and thank you for letting me be part of this.